Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Amigos interview. I am joined by none other than Douglas, aka the 10-minute Amiga Retrocast. How's it going, Douglas?
It is absolutely fantastic, and I'm having a great day.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. Before we dive into the interview proper, why don't you tell people who might not be familiar with your show what exactly the 10-minute Amiga Retrocast is?
Well, about a year ago, when I started getting back into the Amiga after an absence of a couple of years, I noticed that there were a lot of YouTubers and podcasters out there doing a lot of Amiga coverage of video games, but there were very few of them that were actually covering the Amiga hardware and some of the software besides video games. So I thought I'd get into that little niche and start covering things other than games, like hardware.
Well, that you're a wonderful compliment to the show that we do because we stay as far away from that stuff as we can because we know
Absolutely.
that we don't know anything about it. So tell me a little bit about kind of your first experience with the Amiga. What was that like?
Well, I started seeing it in magazines in about 1985. I was an avid Commodore 64 user. Before that, the VIC-20. And I started seeing this Amiga thing in some of the magazines and reading about it and just drooling over it. But the $1,300 price tag to get into an Amiga 2000 was just a little too rich for my blood. I was 16 years old at the time and just couldn't afford it. But when the Amiga 500 came out in 1987, my jaw absolutely dropped that I could pick something up like this for less than $1,000. I think it was $500, $600 at the time. So I saved my pennies and in 1988 made the plunge and bought the Amiga 500 along with a nice monitor, the 1084S, and an external floppy drive, and just absolutely fell in love with the operating system. It was so different than everything else that was out there. I was already familiar with Macintoshes. I had a few people who had Macintoshes as friends, and they were fine. They were cute. They were toys, but they didn't jump out at me like the Amiga did, like the graphics and the sound capabilities of the Amiga. And I just took the plunge, and I've never looked back. It's a fantastic operating system and a fantastic computer.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I am a relative newcomer to the Amiga, but I've used Macs forever and ever. What is it about, if you were going to tell somebody that was familiar with the Mac operating system of the mid to late 80s, this is why what the Amiga does is so much better, aside from the fact that it's a color screen, because of course you're not going to get that on a Mac.
The multitasking is what did it for me. The fact, as soon as I turned it on, and I could run a word processor and hit a key and jump right over to a graphics program and then interchange the data between the two without even thinking about it. And where in the past, when I'd worked with PCs and things like that, sure, they've got great word processors, but now you want to work on a graphics package, you turn it off, you reboot, you put your graphics program in, and then you can do a little bit of graphics, go back, turn it off, reboot, load up the word processor. It just was amazing, the ability to just sit there and do multiple things at once at pretty much full speed. That just amazed me.
Yeah. So you started out, you said, with the 500, right?
That's correct.
And what was your initial purchase? I mean, you bought the machine. What did you get with it?
Well, I bought the 500. I got an external floppy drive, like I mentioned, and the 1084 monitor, which was just amazing. And after a few months of realizing the graphics potential of it, I picked up one of the video digitizers from NewTek, the DigiView, which is a little box about this big that fits into the back of the Amiga. And then you hook up a camera to it, and you're able to scan in actual digital images in a few seconds. There's a little color wheel on it. So you put the image down, you put the camera over this color wheel, and you turn the little wheel, and it scans in red, green, and blue. And after like a minute, you've got these beautiful high color images in your Amiga that just floored me. So I started doing a lot more with graphics images on the Amiga after that. And of course, picked up a few games, Games have never been the biggest thing for me on the Amiga, but they've always been important. I sunk hundreds of hours into things like Dungeon Master and Eye of the Beholder and Black Crypt. Those kind of games just really caught my attention. So I picked up a few of those in the first couple of years.
What about, and that's why I'm so excited to talk to you, because I know that you are much more on the sort of utility productivity side than the game side. And that's something that I'm really curious about. So when you bought your Amiga, you brought it home. I mean, what were you doing with it before you got the color wheel and the digitizer and all that stuff?
Oh, sure. Of course, I had a word processing package and a graphics package. I was using, I think, a version of Deluxe Paint at the time, and then a program called Photon Paint, which works in ham images, which are the 4096 colors on screen at one time. At the time, I was working in a photography store. We were developing film, selling cameras. So I would create flyers for the store, bring in pictures that I took on my camera, and print them out on my little color printer and actually do flyers for the store. And another thing I did productivity-wise with the Amiga is I had a package called Dr. T's Copyist Professional, which is a music program. Oh, yeah, you're into music. And it's a musical notation program, not necessarily playback, although the Amiga does fine on that. But you can actually score tunes in actual musical notation and then print them out.
Oh, okay.
My stepfather owned a music studio. He was a drum teacher, and he also was a music publisher. He would publish music on tape and training tapes for people learning how to do drums. And so I would use the Amiga to actually create the musical scores for all of his books, and then process those, send them over to his printer, and have them professionally printed out right from the Amiga files. It was kind of
wow.
cool.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the fidelity that you'd get from something like that on the Amiga far outclassed anything that was available on the PC at that time.
Absolutely. Very graphics based, yes.
Yeah. So what were some of the catalysts that caused you to move on past the 500 into your next Amiga?
When the Amiga 3000 was announced, I knew I needed to have one of those. I did not feel like I'd outgrown my Amiga 500. I knew that I could get one of the little sidecar expansion boxes to speed it up and put a hard drive in it. And I started balancing the pros and cons of doing that, or just taking the plunge and getting an actual Amiga 3000. Once I saw the article in Byte magazine, which I still have, about the Amiga 3000, and I encourage you to look it up if you haven't read it. It's just incredible.
Okay.
The way that they covered the features of the Amiga 3000, the expandability, and the ability to use a standard VGA monitor, I was just convinced that's the next Amiga that I was going to buy. So I moved up to that, and I think it was 1991.
Yeah, I guess that's sort of a killer 1-2 punch. Being able to use VGA opened up the monitor market considerably from what was available before, and then all of the expandability, because at least in my limited experience, the sidecar thing can get kind of out of control when you start bolting things onto the side of the 500 and the back of the 500, and you end up with sort of a Frankenstein versus being able to keep it all in that box in the case. So you had the 3000, and once you did get the 3000, did it live up to these expectations that you had?
Oh my goodness, it was just incredible. The new Amiga operating system that shipped with it, Amiga OS 2.0, was so far beyond 1.3. It felt much more like using the professional operating system on the Macs of the current age. You're no longer, we're looking at a blue screen with orange icons,
right?
But a nice grayscale presentation. It enhanced the multitasking capabilities, made all of the software talk with each other through a program called AREX, which is a scripting language. So you can have your word processor talk directly with, say, Amiga Vision, which is kind of like a PowerPoint or a multimedia presentation program, and have that interchange data with Art Department Professional, a nice Photoshop type image editing program. And all of these programs can now communicate together on the Amiga 3000 on a way that was a little bit more difficult to do on the Amiga 500 and almost unheard of in the PC market.
How did that work exactly? I mean, was there a protocol that software developers wrote into their programs that allowed AREX to work?
Yes, AREX is based on Rex, which is a scripting language that I may be wrong here, but I think it was Unix based. It was popular in the Unix world, and AREX was our implementation of it. And Commodore was smart enough to build that right into the operating system. All the capabilities and ports, they just built it right in. So when new software was written, the ability to access AREX was right there in the operating system.
Oh,
and
wow.
the authors of the software could just take advantage of it.
And that was something that was new with 2.0.
Yes, that was something that was new with 2.0.
Okay. What was really, how far apart? Because to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever seen 2.0. It seems like you either see 1.2 or 1.3, and then it jumps up to 3.1. So,
Right.
how long was 2.0 a viable thing before version 3 came out?
Really just from 1990-ish, 91 until 1993.
Okay, so a
We
couple
had version
years.
2.0. Yeah, not too long at all. There was an upgrade path for the Amiga 500 and the Amiga 2000 up to version 2.0, but it was really just a fairly brief stepping stone before they got into Amiga OS 3.0 and got into the ability to display AGA graphics and things like that.
Right. And so was that the big jump? Of course, with 3.0 was the AGA chipset.
That is correct. Yep, that was the big jump. The core of the operating system was very similar to 2.0, but they just added the capabilities of accessing the AGA.
Now, is it like it is today whenever there's a new operating system and whenever a new operating system comes out, Microsoft or Apple will cut out features that the people really liked before? Did Amiga OS lose anything between, say, 1.3 and 2.0 or between 2.0 and 3.0?
The biggest thing that they lost was the say command. And I don't know if you've ever played with that, where you can sit at your Amiga and you can just type in a sentence and it will talk right back to you. It's really kind of cool. That was available from, I think it was 1.1 up to 2.04. And then Microsoft, then Commodore did not renew the license for it. And they took all of the say command and the narrator capabilities out of the operating system in version 3. And I really miss that because it was nice to be able to say, write an article or write a story in a word processor and then send it to this say command and have it just talk back to you so you can listen to your script you're writing or whatever and maybe troubleshoot it. Other than that, they didn't take a lot out of the operating systems. They pretty much just added features in.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. And did you move beyond the 3000, or was that your final Amiga?
The 3000 was my final Amiga all throughout college in the 90s. I went to the University of Arizona and I used my Amiga 3000 all through there. But what I did find I had to do, since I was getting deeper and deeper into the information technology field, is I had to get an Amiga bridge board in my Amiga 3000. And as a matter of fact, I've got it sitting right here. There's the little beauty.
Oh, wow.
And what it is, it has a 386 SX processor on it. I think this one runs at 20 megahertz. It had up to 8 megabytes of RAM right on it, floppy drive compatibility. And by plugging this into my Amiga 3000, it just literally became a PC that I could run in tandem with my Amiga. So I'd have my Amiga software running on a screen and then click a little icon and boom, there's a PC right there with 100% MS-DOS compatibility. I had Windows 3.1 running on it for a long time. And it also works with actual things like VGA cards and sound cards too that you can plug into your Amiga. So I had a full 386 running right along with my Amiga 3000. And that helped me from having to go into the PC world for a couple of more years.
Sure. It must have made you feel pretty cool, too, that the fact that you were running a PC inside of your Amiga that was probably faster than a lot of the PCs that you interacted with that were just PCs, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I used to love rubbing that in my friends' faces. I would sometimes have my Amiga running with Amiga OS 2.1 at that time, and I'd have my Bridgeboard running, and then I would run the Shapeshifter software that lets you run Mac OS up to 7.6. Yeah, Mac OS 7.6 in full color at the same time. So I'd have an Amiga, a Mac, and a PC all running at pretty much full screen on my one Amiga 3000. And at that time, you couldn't do that on a PC, and you couldn't do that on a Mac. It was just impossible.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, what do you think it is about the Amiga architecture that allowed that to happen?
Well, the 68,000 was a powerful chip on its own, but something like the Macintosh, that's pretty much all it had in there is the 68,000 and then some glue logic. But with the Amiga and the way the guys thought about taking a separate audio chip, a separate video chip, a separate chip to control this and that and the other thing, and have them all work together and talk together, it did make it more of a closed architecture, but it also made it so you could multitask. You could do more than one thing at a time.
Yeah.
So I just really applaud the guys who created those custom chips. They're just geniuses.
Yeah, yeah. When was the first time that you sort of experienced the writing on the wall for the Amiga, where you were a fan, there were other fans, there were people around, there was a community around the Amiga, but you saw that community start to shrink and market dominance start to slip away? When was that for you?
Well, I was there up until the very end, before Commodore went bankrupt, and I watched everything like a hawk. Every magazine article, every BBS that I could get on that had any kind of information. And that was the early days of the internet too. So, we'd get on what I think it was America Online I had at the time, right before they went bankrupt, just reading everything. And I saw them falling apart, and I knew the end was coming. But I was one of those guys that held on with every sale of the Amiga technologies to a new person. When it almost went to the European branch of Amiga, then when it went to SCOM, and every time thinking, okay, they're going to do it, they're going to pull through, they're going to keep us going. But I would say in about 1998 or 1999, I realized that Gateway, who was the owner at the time, they weren't going to do anything with the Amiga technology at all. They were just sitting on it. And then I got a little faint hope again when the guys in, I think it was in Washington State, bought the Amiga technology and the rights. And then I thought, okay, maybe they're going to do something with it. And again, they pretty much just sat on it and did very, very little with it over the past 15 or so years.
Yeah. Did you ever get into, or do you have any interest now in the new Amiga, the X1000, the X5000, all those new tower-based machines? Have you gotten into any of those at all?
No, it's good stuff, and I really appreciate what they were trying to do. But the Amiga's always been a less expensive alternative for more capabilities and more power. And when they came out with all these PowerPC boards and everything you had to do to run the new Amiga 1 stuff, and it all cost $2,500, $3,000, that's exactly opposite of what the Amiga was about.
Sure.
Just 100% opposite. So I never really jumped into that aspect of things.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. What's been going on? I mean, when you started your channel, I think you just passed your 1-year anniversary a couple weeks ago. Have you sort of shifted focus at all from what your original vision was, or have you managed to kind of stay the course?
No, I've shifted very dramatically. As you can understand from my name, which is 10-minute Amiga Retrocast, I honestly wanted to come out with 10-minute videos. A lot of the YouTube videos I saw would be 30, 40, 50 minutes long, and it's all very interesting, but people don't have that kind of time all the time. So I thought, okay, I'll get in there and I'll do these nice weekly 10-minute videos in and out. People could just watch and move on with their day. Well, that lasted maybe a couple of months before I realized there was so much content out there, so much that I wanted to cover, that I just couldn't do it all in just 10 minutes. So I've moved beyond. I've now admitted to myself that the 10-minute videos are going to be few and far between. I still try every now and again, but I'm pretty happy with the 18 to 25 minutes that I've settled on right now.
Yeah. I think that I think you should definitely keep the name because it's cool.
Yes.
Pinmark,
Yes.
you know.
I like the name.
If there's somebody that has not watched any of your videos before, which one do you think they should start with?
I think the tutorial videos are really useful. As a matter of fact, I just got another message, 2 messages today, as a matter of fact, about the tutorial videos where people were saying, my gosh, I haven't had my Amiga out of the closet in 20 years, and I happened across your video, and now I want to get back in there, and I want to start playing with it. So I think if somebody is maybe just got a passing interest in the Amiga or remembers it, take a look at some of my tutorial videos, and it may just light the fire again and remember how much fun it was to use an Amiga back in the day and get people back into the hobby.
What's your favorite thing about this whole experiment in YouTube? What's the greatest joy it's brought to you?
The absolute greatest joy has been making new friends, yourself included.
Absolutely.
Just people in Germany, people in Europe, people in Australia, people in Canada, just getting to know the other people in the community and make genuine connections with them has been just fantastic. I truly feel like I could get on a plane and hop over to another country and somebody there would take me in for, crash on the couch for a day or so while I'm visiting. Just that level of friendship.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, by the way. That's my favorite thing about this whole Amigos thing. And it's funny because we're called the Amigos, and all the friends that Aaron and I have made throughout this last 5 years, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. What do you think the future lies in store for your channel? Do you have any kind of projects that are on the horizon but have not quite come to fruition yet that you want to share?
Sure. One of them is I'm going to be doing a large series on the video toaster. You've obviously at least heard of the video toaster before. And I've got a working one in my Amiga 2000. And my plan is to integrate that video toaster with my actual videos. The biggest stumbling block right now is all the videos you and I do are 16:9, and the video toaster does 4:3. So I have to compensate for that. But I want to actually use the toaster in the creation of my videos and have an at least 4-part tutorial series on the toaster itself on how to use it and the great features that it has.
That's awesome. That sounds really cool. And you should definitely email Will Wheaton because he is the video toaster guy.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and he does all kinds of crazy stuff with random people all the time. You never know; he might even do a little thing for that video. What do you think about obviously you've got a big collection right now. Do you have any grails left? I mean, is there any piece of hardware that you would like to have that you don't currently have?
Yes, there is. I have always wanted an Amiga 600 just because they're so darn cute. They're just these adorable little tiny things, but yet they can do so much. It'd be fun to make some kind of portable thing with it that I could take maybe to Amiga shows, easy portability. So an Amiga 600 would be lovely. And I would say CD32 would be okay, but I've never really been into that aspect of things. But if somebody, gave me one.
If it landed on your doorstep one day, you wouldn't kick it into the garbage. Yeah. Speaking of shows, have you been to any local shows showing off your Amiga collection?
Not yet. I'm planning on going to Amy West this October. That's in California. And I want to have a small booth there and just bring a couple pieces of my equipment up there and shake hands and meet some people. And the VCF, the vintage computer shows that go on around the country. Those, I think, are the best place to network, best place to meet people with the same mindset. So my goal is to hit as many of those shows across the country as I can, hopefully next year.
Awesome. All right. Well, before we close this thing out, I got to ask you about your desert island discs. If you were marooned on a desert island and you could only play one player game, or if there was a friendly native and you could have one 2-player game, what would those games be?
Boy, that is really an excellent question. I would have to say Black Crypt from Electronic Arts. It's so beautiful. I know you weren't the biggest fan of the game when you played it, but there's just so much fun to be had in creating your party and creating little personalities for them as you play through the game. That I think that would keep me entertained for a particularly long time. Yep, I'd bring Black Crypt with me.
Okay, and how about a 2-player game?
2-player game. I think one of the Pac-Man type games. I'm really addicted to those. Pac-Man Deluxe for the Amiga is absolutely fantastic.
Oh yeah,
I know it's not official Pac-Man.
No, but
it's incredible.
It's very good. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I would say I would play some good 2-player Pac-Man Deluxe for the rest of my life on a desert island.
Fantastic. Well, Doug, thank you so much for joining us on the Amigos interview. I appreciate your time. You have any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to mention also that I'm pretty heavily into the 8-bit side of things too. If you look over my shoulder there.
Oh, yeah.
You see my Commodore VIC-20, and I got a bunch of 1571 drives over here. I also do a lot of 8-bit stuff in my show, so keep an eye out. I'm expanding the 8-bit side of my channel too.
Fantastic.
All Commodore.
That's great.
Oh, and one more thing. I thought you would enjoy.
Oh, yeah.
Right here.
Yeah.
Nice 800 XL. It's got bad memory, but I've got new memory chips that have come in. I'm going to be doing a show on that in the next week or two.
Well,
also.
That is the crown jewel of the Atari 8-bit line. So I'm so
nice.
glad you got one. Yeah. Well, Doug, thanks so much for joining me, and I will talk to you on Discord.
Thank you, John.
All right. Bye-bye.
I appreciate it. Bye-bye.